Hello everyone, I'm International Master Andrew Martin and welcome to this basic introduction to chess. The idea of this DVD is to teach you how to play chess in the shortest possible time. No fuss, no frills. And the key to getting the most out of it is to master each section before you go on to the next one. I think that is the best advice I can offer at this stage. So we're going to go straight in. And in the first section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the chessboard. And we've got a chessboard in front of us. Now the board has 64 squares, 32 of which are called light squares or white squares, marked by the yellow colour. And 32 squares are dark squares, or black squares, whichever you prefer. Each of those squares has got a name. And the way we determine the name is to look around the edge of the board, and there we'll see 8 letters, A to H, and 8 numbers, 1 to 8. All we have to do in order to work out which square is called what is to join up the letter and the number. So for instance, if we take the square in the bottom left hand corner, that square is A1. We can work it out by just joining up the letter A and the number 1, that's A1. If we go into the middle of the board, this would be the E5 square. Again, it's a simple case of joining up the letter at the bottom with the number at the side. And finally, let's look at a square on the edge of the board. What about this one? That will be the H7 square. We're joining up the letter and the number once again. The idea of giving each square a name helps us when we want to record our own games or to read chess books and magazines. The system is meant to be as easy as possible to understand. So I hope you can now work out which square is which on the chessboard. Let's do a little test. I'm going to mark a square in green. What is the name of that square? Well, that's the C6 square. We join up the letter C with the number 6. C6. Let's come down here to the bottom right hand corner. What square will that be? Well, that's the H1 square. Again, very simple, H1. So already you've made a significant step forward in your chess understanding. Now the board is made up of ranks, files and diagonals. If we think of a rank of soldiers, we can see them in our mind standing side by side. So ranks go horizontally across the board. This would be white's 4th rank. Again, it's a question of looking at the number on the side. Ranks run horizontally across the board. So we have 1st rank, 2nd rank, 3rd rank, 4th rank, 5th rank, and all the way up to the 8th rank. So those are ranks. And I'm just going to put a big arrow across. Now we come to files, and files run vertically up the board. They're denoted by using the letter at the bottom of the file, so this would be the C file. Again, we've got a different file there, that is the H file. And finally diagonals, well, they speak for themselves. They run diagonally across the board, and they can be short or long. For instance, you've got a very long diagonal here from A1 all the way across to H8, or you could have a very short diagonal which runs from B8 to A7, comprising only 2 squares. So ranks, files and diagonals make up the chessboard. After talking a little bit about the board, we now come on to the moves of the pieces, a very important step forward. And the first piece I'm going to discuss is the king. Now the king is your most important piece. We'll find out why this is a little bit later on when I come to introduce the subject of checkmate. The king is a slow moving piece. He can move.
Hello, my name's International Master Andrew Martin,
and I'd like to bid you a warm welcome to this Teach Yourself Chess series, the sole purpose of which is to turn you into a much better chess player. Now, there are 5 parts to this series. On this first DVD I'll be looking at basic chess, and then I'll be going on to look at tactics, strategy and planning, attack and defence, and we'll finish with the endgame. By the time you've completed this course, I hope you'll feel confident to go on out there and play a much better game of chess. Alright, it's time to get on with the show. Let's go. Hello, I'm International Master Andrew Martin, and I'm also the manager of coaching for the English Chess Federation. I'd like to welcome you to this series of DVDs which will help you surely to improve your chess. And the first of these DVDs is called Basic Chess, where I introduce you to the rudiments of the game. Now, in front of you here we see the chessboard. The chessboard has 64 squares, 32 of which are light and 32 of which are dark. Note that a white corner square should always lie on white's right hand, hence the saying white on the right. Each square has a number and a letter attached to it, and this helps us when we want to write our own games out or read chess books and magazines. And the system is meant to be as easy as possible to understand. Now, if you look round the perimeter of the board, you will see that there are letters beneath the board, A to H, and numbers at the side of the board, 1 to 8. The board is thus a grid, and in order to find the name of any given square, you simply join up the letter and the number. Thus, if I just mark this square in green, that is the square D4. Easy to calculate. We have D and we have the number 4. Moving on, the square marked in red will be G6. It's on the G file and the 6th rank. We will come to consider these ideas of ranks and files in a moment. The final square I'm going to mark is B8. Once again, this is the B file and the 8th rank. So actually, recognition of squares is quite an easy task. As long as you remember you have to join up the letter and the number, it's easy to get the right square. Now, the chessboard is made up of ranks, files and diagonals. Ranks run horizontally and are marked with the red arrow. We would typically describe ranks as the first rank, the second rank, the third rank. I'm going to mark the third rank in yellow there, the fourth rank, fifth rank, etc. Files run vertically and are marked by the green arrow. Thus, you would typically describe files as the A file, the B file, the C file, the D file, E file, F file, etc. And diagonals, well, that's self-explanatory. They run diagonally and are marked by the yellow arrow. Again, if you are at all unsure about this concept, run over this section again until you are 100% ready to go on. Let's have a bit of practice now recognising squares before we go on. I've coloured a few squares on the chessboard. I wonder if you can name them. Try to name them before we go on. Alright, well, the squares marked in green, I hope you got this right, are C2 and D3. The squares marked in yellow are H1 and B4. In case you're forgetting how to work this out, just join up the letter with the number to get B4. And finally, the squares marked in red are H8 and A8. If you're not sure about this, have another go until you have mastered this idea. I'm sure you will pick it up quickly. Well, here we see the starting position of the chess. We know something about the board now. Let's go on to consider the pieces. Well, in chess there are 3 short-range pieces and 3 long-range pieces. The short-range pieces are the pawn, the knight and the king. Each of these pieces moves slowly across the chessboard, and it's no secret that nominally they have the lowest value. The pawn is worth 1, the knight is supposed to be worth 3, and the king has no value at all, because as we know, if the king is checkmated, the game is over. Moreover, Hello, this is International Master Andrew Martin here once again, and on this DVD 2 we're going to be discussing tactics. Welcome to DVD 2. Now, a master from the past, Richard Teichmann, once famously remarked that chess is 99% tactics. I'm not sure I fully agree with that remark, but there is definitely an element of truth in it. Many, if not most games, are decided by tactical mistakes. So what I'm going to do on this DVD is to introduce you in a very basic form to all the major tactical ideas in chess, and then we're going to see how they work out using complete illustrative games, so that you know, it's okay to present them in the most basic form, but what you really want to do is to see how they work out in games, and see how these tactical mistakes ensure that games are won and lost. So we go straight into the tactical ideas section now, and the first thing I want to illustrate is a pin. You may or may not have heard this term. Now, the pin is a very powerful tactical device. The pin ties the enemy down. When you pin a piece, it means that it cannot or should not move. Your piece can move, therefore it's mobile. His piece can't move, therefore it's passive. Just let me illustrate how this might happen in a game. There are 2 types of pin you should know about. What I'm setting up on the board is a fairly standard queen's pawn opening. And here, white now puts the black knight in a pin. The white bishop pins the black knight. This is called a normal pin, because of course if black is completely insane, he can move his knight, but then of course he would lose his queen. So the knight is therefore tied down. That in essence is a pin. Now if I play back to the very beginning of the game, let me try and illustrate another idea for you. Alright, we'll have black play d6, white plays e4, black plays knight c6, and now the white bishop again puts the second black knight in a pin, but this time the pin is absolute. The black knight cannot move under any circumstances. It's pinned to the king. So an absolute pin and a normal pin. Now, the best advice I can give you, because pins crop up in virtually every game of chess, if you're in a pin, get out of it as quickly as possible. There are several ways to get out of a pin. The first way, and by far the simplest way, is to unpin. Therefore, black's simplest move, and probably his best move too in this position, is to just get the bishop to d7 and unpin. Now of course the knight can move. Okay, black's last move was very modest, but it's a perfectly reasonable defensive move. So the unpin is perhaps the most common way of getting out of a pin, and very effective. Just going back one move. A second way to resolve the problem of a pin is to attack the pinned piece. So for instance, a6 is another reasonable move for black. Now white's got to make a decision. Does he move in and double the black pawns after bishop takes c6? That's one perfectly good move. Or just going back, does he keep the pin up and increase the pressure by playing bishop a4? In this case it's true, black can again break the pin by going b5, and then probably white would retreat to b3 and the game continues. On DVD 3 we're going to be discussing strategy and planning. Fasten your seatbelts for some really excellent chess. Welcome to DVD 3 in the series. where we're going to be discussing strategy and planning. Now, first of all, let's try and define exactly what we mean when we talk in those terms. Let's deal with strategy first. Well, in my view, strategy, and I'm going to keep this very simple, is the planning and conduct of the long-term objectives within a game. The grand idea of what you're trying to do, if you like. And the goal of strategy is to gain a chess advantage and then exploit it. Now, what type of advantages should we be looking to develop in a game of chess? Okay, well, firstly, the first and most obvious one is we should be trying to gain material. You know, if we get up material in a game of chess, we can hopefully exploit that as the game progresses, get to a better end game and win. So more material is certainly very important. We should be trying to develop better mobility for our pieces, and we should be trying to get the better pawn structure. Quite often strategy in a game of chess is actually defined by the pawn structure, and a little bit later on I'll be trying to show you exactly what I mean by this. We're trying to gain space, and we would certainly be looking to get the safer king position. You know, in chess it's very difficult to play when your king is out in the open and the opponent's king is safe. So a safe king, I would say, is a prerequisite of successful strategy, usually. All these advantages can be described as static. You know, they don't go very far, they enable you, they give you a free hand to make plans. Planning, on the other hand, I would say, these days can be defined as short-term objectives, whereas strategy is long-term, it's an overall idea. Planning, you know, the clash of plans in the chess game is possibly the most interesting aspect of the game itself, because if both players have a grand plan, what happens when this grand plan meets in the middle of the chessboard? Obviously there's going to be some sort of fireworks going on with this clash of plans going on. So what actually happens in a modern game of chess is that both players are continually devising short-range plans throughout the game, some idea of where they're going to go next, and adapt to the situation as it develops on the board. But of course it's a good idea of having a long-term overall objective, if you like, to help you with your short-range ideas. So strategy is long-term, planning is short-term and changes throughout the game. And well, I'm going to try and show you what I mean now by first of all showing an illustrative game. This game comes from the Mitropa Cup in May 2009. It's played between a guy called Jure Scoburn and he's playing Denis Rombaldoni. Both of these players are international masters. DVD 4 focuses on attack and defence. We really are moving forward quickly now, and you should feel yourself becoming a stronger player as we go along. On the first part of this final DVD, I'm going to discuss the most important concepts of attack and defence in chess. It's obvious that if you're going to be really good at this game, you've got to be skillful at both attack and defence. And we're going to consider attack first. Now, whole books have been written about the art of attack, but I believe I can reduce the understanding of how to attack into a few simple concepts. The first and most important thing you have to understand is that when you attack, no matter how you attack, you have to go in with everything you've got. This is most important. You have to throw the kitchen sink at your opponent. You have to include every last piece that can be included in the attack. This is the most important thing I can say to you at this point. Successful attack proceeds from either A lead in development. It was Steinitz who formulated the rule that when you're ahead in development you must attack in order to justify this lead in development. And the idea is that if you don't attack at the right moment when you're ahead in development, the advantage will evaporate and you'll be left with nothing. So timing is of the essence here. And B, successful attacks proceed from an advantage in space. Possibly the two things will combine to furnish a successful attack. But if those considerations are not in place, then it's unlikely that an attack is going to succeed. You see this time and again in the games of the average player. Premature attacks are launched which are not based on solid foundations, and of course the attack founders simply breaks down. So now it's time to look at some games to try and highlight these points and to show you exactly what I mean. And the first of these games comes from the Hastings tournament, very famous tournament played annually in England in 1972. This is an old game, but it's a classic. Playing white is Wolfgang Ullmann, who was East Germany's #1 player for decades and one of the best players in the world. And playing black, the legendary Vasily Smyslov, an ex-world champion who, even in 1972, was a phenomenally strong player. A man with an incredible instinct for chess. Smyslov is really known as an harmonious player. That is the trademark of his style. Each of the world champions has contributed something to the game, and Smyslov contributed the understanding of harmony in chess, the necessity to coordinate the pieces, and after that to go forward to increase the advantage towards the win. So on the one hand we've got the dynamic Ullmann, and on the other hand we've got the harmonious Smyslov. An exciting contest is guaranteed. Okay, well, this is the English opening. It is today. Ullmann's still playing as a veteran. Ullmann's favourite opening with white. Basically, the English opening sets out to control the central square d5. White is saying to black, you won't be able to free yourself unless you can conquer the square d5. And I'm going to do everything in my power to stop you from doing that. So here we see Smyslov just countering with e5 and Ullmann bringing out the knight to d3 and at the same time controlling the d5 square. And now development over the next few moves is very easy to understand. Both sides are bringing out their pieces. This is known as the four knights variation of the English for obvious reasons. It's a straightforward and once again harmonious system of development with black. Black doesn't waste time, he just brings out the piece and prepares to castle. It suits Smyslov's style very well. And white now plays bishop g2. So in the English, once again, we see several white pieces trying to control this square d5. It's so important, if you want to tie your opponent down in the opening, to try and make him passive in the centre. And this is what the main idea, strategical idea of the English is all about, to force black passive in the centre and to give white a free hand to build up an advantage in the position. It's a fairly patient way to play with. On this final DVD, we move to consider a vitally important topic, the endgame. No player can call himself strong unless he or she has studied the endgame properly. So that's what we're going to do now. Hello, this is International Master Andrew Martin here once again, and on this final DVD in the series we're going to talk a little bit about the endgame. Now, it's a fact that all strong players are excellent at the endgame. It's such an important component of the overall makeup of the strong chess player. The main point about chess is that it should be viewed as a whole. The game should be viewed as an entity. The opening leads naturally to the middle game and the middle game onto the end game. Quite often decisions that are taken very early in the game affect endgame situations. But nevertheless, there are certain rules and aspects of the endgame that we should know about, and I'm hoping to increase your technique here by presenting them to you. First of all, let's try and compile a very basic list of the requirements of endgame play. What are the most important things to remember? Alright, well, the very most important thing is that you should play endgames slowly and carefully if you can, whatever the position. Unlike the opening and the middle game, where perhaps you can get away with virtually any move. No, in chess, if you make a mistake, it's not necessary that this mistake costs the whole game. You know, you can often make one or two small mistakes in a game of chess, particularly in the middle game, with most of the pieces on the board and get away with it. But in the end game, you can't do that. Because there's only a limited amount of material on the board, even one small mistake can cost you the point. So precision is required in the end game, and this is why you have to play slowly. The second important thing to realise is that the king is a very strong piece in the endgame. The king should be used actively and aggressively. Of course, if you start using the king actively when there are a lot of pieces on the board, you're likely to get checkmated. But in the endgame, with only a few pieces left, the king becomes a strong piece and you have to start using the king aggressively. Thirdly, and this is most important, the main object of any endgame is to create a passed pawn. We've discussed passed pawns and their consequences on other DVDs in this series. But in general, the passed pawn ties the enemy down. The idea is that when he's tied down, you can push this pawn forward to promote the pawn, and in an ideal world, mate follows. Very few endgames tolerate slapdash play or hasty decision making. Now, what I'm going to do for you is to pull out 10 extremely important endgames, which I feel you have to know. In general these days, I believe the endgame should be studied in chunks. Small, bite-sized, easy to understand chunks. In general, we're going to look at some typical positions that are going to come up time and time again in your games. The idea is that you learn how to play these typical positions perfectly, so that when they crop up or something similar occurs in your games, you'll be able to trot out the right technique just as easily as you would recall the first 10 moves of the Sicilian Dragon, if that's the opening you play. This is the way to study endgames these days, particularly in this era of fast time controls, when you reach an endgame situation and you might be short of time. So this is why it's very important to have some knowledge of endgame theory. But we have to walk before we can run, and so I'm going to deal with basic positions first.
Hello, this is Andrew Martin and welcome to Volume 2 of the DVD Opening Ideas and Techniques for Young Players. In this second half of the DVD, I'm going to show you some really quite interesting attacking systems which you can use in your own games, and which for the most part will come as a complete surprise to the opponent. So right from the outset, you're cultivating the right approach. When you're improving, you have to develop an attacking style above all and put the opponent onto the defensive right from the start. Defensive play among improvers and beginners is almost non-existent. So if you can get onto the attack, then you can win game after game after game. This is no place to develop a full repertoire for white and black, because we'd be here all day. You'd literally have a 24-hour DVD. But I'm going to point you in the right direction by showing you some systems which I won't say lie ignored by grandmasters or by really strong players, but obviously the realm of chess opening theory is so wide, that certain very good systems don't get the attention they deserve. And we're going to look at 4 of these on these DVD, which I think you'll agree are very dangerous ideas. And the first of these is a system for white after e4, e5. Now, clearly, when you're improving, you're going to get this position in many, if not most of your games. The open game is what all coaches recommend to young players to try first when they're improving, and that's because it's quite easy to get all the pieces out. So it follows that as white, you have to have something against this, which is a dangerous weapon. So I'm going to recommend that you play d4 here, and after e takes d4, play c3. This is an opening called the Danish Gambit, but we're going to spice it up a bit here by, after d takes c3, playing knight takes c3. The Danish Gambit proper is where white plays bishop c4 in this position, allowing black to take the pawn on b2. We're not going to do that. We're going to play knight takes d3, knight takes c3. This is called the half Danish Gambit, and for some reason it's just not played that often. There's a similar opening called the Goring Gambit. Let me just show you how that works. White plays knight f3, black plays knight c6, d4, e takes d4, c3, d takes c3, and now white can choose here between going bishop c4 and knight takes c3. You can see this is a cousin of our suggestion. The only difference is white's already got his knight on f3. Now what we and the opponent will have to puzzle out is what are the differences here. Well, not an enormous amount of difference, but there are two that I can see. Number one, the path of the white queen is unobstructed, so quite often that queen can shoot out to h5, not being blocked by the knight. And number two, white can often play f4 instead of knight f3, before knight f3. And these two options give the white position a lot of oomph. And it's no surprise to me that this system was a favourite of ex-world champion Alexander Alekhine. He was a very famous attacking player, and he used to surprise his opponents with all sorts of opening systems. So it seems fitting to take a look at one of his games first. This game comes from the Moscow Championship in 1919, a very old game, but very suitable for our purposes. And he's white against Konstantin Isakov. Hello everyone, I'm Andrew Martin, International Master from England, and welcome to this DVD on opening ideas for young players, where I'm going to give you some top tips on how to play the opening successfully in 2015. We're going to split this up into two separate parts. In the first volume, I'm going to be covering the absolute basics. What do you need to know? What do you need to do to play the opening successfully? And in the second volume, I'm going to be giving recommendations. What are the best opening choices when you're a young player trying to make your way in chess? And at the end, I hope you'll agree, it's a fairly complete course in how to play the opening of a chess game. So to volume 1, and let me just list what we're going to cover in this DVD. We're going to learn that playing open positions is the best thing for a young player to do right at the start, with a view to getting onto the attack, both with white and with black. Try and open up the game early and get onto the attack. We're going to learn that getting your king to safety is extremely important. Too many young players have a cavalier attitude to the opening. They leave their king in the centre and they get wiped out by better players who understand how to attack a king which is vulnerable. We're going to learn how to use time, how time in a chess game can work for you. And we're going to understand that learning tactics right at the start is the key to successful improvement. We're going to learn that it's important to be prepared, and it's also important to experiment. Don't get all messed up with results right at the start. Don't worry about losing. It's important to experiment, to find out what you like, to keep track of your results, to have some sort of system in place. And finally, we're going to look on how to move forward. You've got to a certain point. What do you need to do next in order to go forward? Well, a lot of these ideas might seem self-evident, but even masters and grandmasters have problems sometimes in the opening when they neglect the basics. So here comes my first point. Neglect of the basics leads quickly to defeat. And so let's just now review the basic ideas of the opening. Okay, number one, control or occupy the centre of the board at the start of the game. There we see the four squares in the middle of the board that constitute the centre, and we could call the two squares next to these squares the extended centre. Anything you do in the opening 10 moves should be looking at controlling or occupying these squares, trying to get a foothold in the centre. The next thing you should be thinking about is making only the pawn moves that are necessary to develop the pieces. I can tell immediately when I look at a game between two young players or two beginners which is the stronger player. It's important to understand that in the opening you make a few pawn moves and plenty of piece moves. You've got to get your pieces out. So the best pawns to push are generally the central pawns. That's why you'll see in a lot of master games they just push those two pawns up in the opening as early as.
A double fianchetto system with black appeals to a lot of players, but in my view it's an idea which has to be used with discretion. There are many dangerous attacking systems for white, and black must know when to duck and when to punch. Remembering theory is hardly the issue here. Instead, a good grasp of positional ideas is the only thing that matters. We're going to look at a number of interesting and still original ideas for black, usually connected with the move 1b6, but which may or may not involve the move g6 as well. And at the end of this DVD, you will have a new and almost wholly original system at your disposal. And in these days of the database and the theory freaks, these hackneyed days, what could be better than that? Before we get into the realm of the illustrative games, I can hear you asking, well, what are the main attractions and advantages in playing this Queen's Fianchetto system of defence or related Hippo positions? Well, the first point is it's very provocative. A lot of players are going to be thrown completely off balance by this method of play that black adopts. It's very unusual. White might not have seen it. There are many ways to go wrong early in the game. It's very original. I mean, in which other system of defence are you going to see black playing moves like the following? For instance, after moves like 3f3, you could be countering energetically in the centre with 3d5. In traditional King's Indian type positions, you could be playing very aggressively like Boris Spassky with h5. Or, after a period of cool defence, you could be turning the tables completely like Nona Gaprindashvili with the active Queen h4. So you can see this is not at all a passive system of defence. And in fact, there's a lot of satisfaction in creating something original and new. And I would say that is what this whole system of defence provides from black's point of view. So just to sum up, we're being provocative. We're trying to be original. We're looking to counter-attack. We're trying to create something new. We're steering the game into paths of our choosing. Now we're going to start the show with a game from the Dubai Open 2002. And this is an exemplary... The London system is easy to learn and offers White an enviable weapon with which to score the win. White obtains easy and flexible development and has a rock-solid pawn structure. And indeed, as we ease our way through this DVD, we'll see that none other than Garry Kasparov has been attracted by the internal logic running through White's formation. What I'm going to do now is just to try and break down a few of the typical ideas that we'll be looking at as we go through this introductory DVD so that you don't feel all at sea. I would say there are two key moves after d4. The first of which is the symmetrical d5, which a lot of Queen's Gambit players are going to play. And against that, I believe White's most accurate reaction is to delay the development of the knight on g1 and simply play bishop f4. With a variety of ideas. For instance, if black sets up a Queen's Gambit formation with e6, White may continue to develop naturally, but at the same time delay that knight on g1 coming into the game. And here we might see a reason if black plays bishop d6. White snaps off the bishop and then goes f4. And possibly establishes a favourable stone wall formation. Just going back, if black isn't too keen on blocking in the bishop on c8 just yet, we can still play our typical idea. And the same idea with bishop d3 takes shape. At the same time, black may set up a formation where he doesn't offer the exchange of dark square bishops, playing his bishop to e7, and as soon as that bishop comes out to e7 and leaves our bishop unchallenged on f4, then it's time for knight gf3. And we'll see later that if black carelessly castles in such a position, he can fall victim to a very powerful kingside attack, which might begin with the move h4. Of course, there's no obligation for black to block in the queen's bishop, and so a lot of players are going to play a Slav formation, just copying what you do, setting up a symmetrical London system in return, if you like. Here I think white has two very promising approaches, both of which involve the move c4. He can either develop his knight to d2 or his knight to c3. We'll see examples of each as we go through the tape. Queen b6 is the main line. White's quite happy to offer the exchange of queens. And the main point of this is that after c4, c5, white is able to establish pressure against the black queen side with the help of moves such as b4, already threatening b5 in the given position, and then knight d2, the key manoeuvre with the idea of knight b3 to a5, establishing a grip on the position.
Welcome to Volume 2. International Master and FIDE Senior Trainer Andrew Martin here with you again. It's time once again to assess the position. Well, we're going to start off the second half, keeping the concept of planning firmly in mind. I've got some interesting topics for you, and the first of these topics is how do you deal with a situation where the players have castled on opposite sides of the board. This is quite a common idea and crops up all the time. Okay, so I've got a game from you from the Polish Rapid Championship, which was played in March 2018, and I think it illustrates what you should do in this type of situation very well indeed. It's a game between two Poles, Witorak playing with white, his grade is 2464, and Kopczynski playing with black, 2225. You'd think that the white player, being 240 points higher than his opponent, would be able to stroll to victory. But full marks to black for playing one of the most combative openings out there, and we quickly get a Sicilian dragon on the board. Well, if it worked, it would be a fantastic opening. The only problem with it is, in order to play it, number one, you've got to know an incredible amount of theory, because like all these sharp opening variations, you know, a huge body of theory is accumulated behind this variation. And secondly, there's a problem with one line. It's always been the line against the dragon that causes the hassle, and that's the Yugoslav attack, starting with f3. This is also known as the Rouser attack. And really, it's only the Rouser attack which gives the dragon any problems at all. Most of the other lines see black getting a good position with ease. Now, of course, all dragon specialists will have their own favourite line against the Yugoslav attack. There are many ways for black to play, and the critical position is coming up, with black casting on the king side, white playing queen to d2, so white's getting ready maybe to play bishop h6 at some point. Quite often you can take a lot of the sting out of the fianchetto positions by just removing that bishop, and that's why commonly white builds up with his battery of bishop and queen. Black plays knight c6, and now white plays the line with bishop to c4. This is an important parting in the ways on its own, because white can also castle here. That's another main line of the Yugoslav attack. But as I say, I can't stick too much with theory here. Bishop c4 was played, and now black plays bishop d7. By and large, that is the most common move. And white cheerfully castles on the queen side. So here we have the first point in the game where really I would like you to assess the position. What should the plans for both sides be in a situation like this? What do you recommend for black? How might the game proceed? Well, you might know this answer already, but it's still worth dwelling on the position for a little while. Right, well, the first rule of this type of position is that, in general, whoever is fastest wins. You're trying to start an attack. White would be trying to start an attack against black's king, and black would likewise be trying to start an attack on the queen side. One of the main benefits of the Sicilian defence is that black often gets a half-open c-file to work with down to the white king. So black would possibly be using the c-file as an attacking weapon, probably putting a rook on that file at some point in the very near future. But in general, speed is of the essence. Opposite sides castling positions. So black played a logical move here, rook to c8. That's not the only move, but it does give white cause to think about his loose bishop on c4.
Other moves that have been played here, well, queen to a5 has been played, just getting the queen into the business area. But black has even tried queen to b8. That's quite an interesting move, making room for the rook on f8 to come over to c8, and then black starts pushing the queenside pawns. This is quite an interesting plan. Most dragon specialists would feel that's probably not best here, but nevertheless it is a possibility. And black could of course play the Chinese dragon, rook to b8. One more line here that white's got to think about. And the plan after that is to put his knight on e5, to play b5, and then to play the knight to c4. Hello everyone, and welcome to this new Foxy DVD, which is going to be slightly different from the norm because I'm going to be hopefully encouraging you to develop your middle game skills. I'm going to invite you to assess the position across a whole range of middle game ideas, using examples from the latest master play. So join with me now on this adventure through the chess middle game. Hello everyone, this is International Master Andrew Martin here, and welcome to this DVD on more or less chess strategy. It's called Assess the Position. What I intend to do is to go through a whole bunch of games with you which illustrate certain strategical ideas. At critical moments in the game, I'm going to stop the video and I'm going to ask you to assess the position in every case. Then you can compare your assessment with my assessment and we'll see how the game developed and possibly finished. In this way, I hope that you can develop your chess technique. Basically, this is a DVD where if you put the work in, you're bound to improve. If you just ignore the work element and you don't stop the DVD, you just let it run on and let the answers flow, then you won't get as much out of it as you will if you really study the positions carefully and try to reach an assessment on your own. So in this introductory section, what I think I'd like to do is basically describe how you should look at any position to get the most out of it. What are the elements of a position which you must use to come to the right assessment? I've listed them on the screen. Well, when you reach a position you've never seen before, the very first thing you should do is count the pieces. I know this sounds naive, it sounds simplistic, but the material count makes a big difference. It's obvious that if you're material ahead, you should keep it simple. Just try and trade down to a better end game if you can, and avoid enemy tactics. If you're behind on material, you've got to mix things up. You've got to create tactics. You've got to try to attack. You must avoid exchanges, things like that. So counting the pieces is quite important. The second point is king safety. Compare the position of the two kings. Generally speaking in chess, it's very difficult to create anything meaningful if you've got an unsafe king. I mean, you might be able to do it. There are definitely examples where this has happened. But it's much less likely that you'll be able to create something good from your position if your king is unsafe. So compare the position of the kings. Pawn structure is also extremely important when we come to assess the position. We're going to be dealing with this in some detail because I think it's an element of chess which is often neglected by improving players. Generally, if you have the better pawn structure, you have more choice of plans. Item 4, who has the most active pieces? It's obvious that ideally it should be you. Active pieces really do make a difference, and again they create opportunities for the holder of those pieces. And finally, I think it's worthwhile making a tactics check in the position. You know, are there any threats? Can you create any threats? So there we are. Those are the elements of chess strategy. When you're looking at a position, you should consider all of them. So after that brief introduction, it's time to move on to the games themselves.